Thank you, John, and I'm happy to answer your questions in the question and answer sessions later on. I'm very pleased to have been invited. I'm very honoured and privileged to have been invited to come to the MacGill Summer School. I've heard a lot about it over the years, not least from my father, but having experienced the first morning, I now understand what he was going on about. It is the most stimulating morning I've had in a very, very long time, so I'm very honoured to be here. But I think I should preface what I'm going to say by making my stall very clear. I'm very much at one with Gareth Fitzgerald last night in the view that there is a need for political reform. I passionately believe that now is a time for political reform. I really think there's a desperate need, and it's one that we shouldn't waste. We're in a crisis, and the old adage is don't waste a good crisis. This is about as good a crisis as we're ever going to get in hopefully ever. So let's not waste it. But in more political science jargon, there's a phrase that's used. It's borrowed from biology, and it's the only bit of jargon I use, I promise, today. A political disequilibrium. I can't even pronounce it. Political disequilibrium, which is a notion of if you're going to get change, it doesn't happen through gradual evolution. It happens in fits and starts. It happens at moments of crisis, when you get a coalition of interests that come together, all having the same view that now is a time in which something has to happen. And I think it's fair to say most of us would argue that that's precisely the moment that we're in now. And it's very heartening. I know I'm naive, but I find it certainly heartening that the Joint Committee of the Constitution is fated to come out with some proposals for political reform in the not-too-distant future. Both main opposition parties that could form the next government have both nailed their colours to the mast at this stage about fundamental political reform. So that the coalition of interests, at least at the elite level, is beginning to show some signs of taking this thing seriously. Whether this will be followed through on, of course, as we all know, is quite another thing. So I just wanted to start by saying that, because I wanted to be on the same wavelength as someone like Gareth Fitzgerald. But I fundamentally disagree with Gareth in one respect, and that is over the importance that he, among others, Noel Dempsey is another a person who I've debated on a couple of platforms with about this, placed the electoral system at the heart of the problem. I fundamentally disagree. I would argue, and I think it's safe to say that most political scientists in this country, or political theorists, as Gareth was referring to us last night, I think we prefer to call ourselves political scientists. We follow the evidence. We don't have grandiose theories here. Most political scientists would be of the same view as myself, which is that to focus on the electoral system is to miss the point. And that's the essence of what I want to talk about. So let me get to the gist of this. The basic argument which we heard from Gareth last night, and which we heard from Ed Walsh in a recent article in the Irish Times, and we've heard from Noel Dempsey and from many others, is that STV, the single transferable vote, our lovely electoral system, promotes a politics of excessive localism, where the TDs are running around chasing each other to nurse the constituencies to maximise their votes, maximise their transfer patterns, to get every possible vote that they can get. And so the single transferable vote is credited with the blame, most of the blame for this, because of the stress that's placed on the fate of individual candidates and on the votes that those individual candidates get. In other words, the essence, the logic of the argument is you remove the single transferable vote, you move to another system, and in one fell swoop, you solve our localist problems. Our TDs wake up the next day and they work in a completely different way. That's the essence of the argument. I'm being unfair, but effectively that's what it's getting at. Well, what I want to suggest in the few minutes I've got is that our argument is misplaced. It's missing the target. It's not going for the right piece of institutional reform to fix the problem that it's trying to fix. And I'm going to do that by taking us through what I would argue are three myths about the single transferable vote system. So I'm going to go through each of these three myths, set them out, and then finish briefly with an alternative proposal, which isn't earth-shattering, but I think would probably do an awful lot more than changing the single transferable vote system. So let's start with the first myth. The first myth is that Ireland has, quote, a unique electoral system. We've heard that this morning, we heard it last night, and we've seen it in various newspapers around the world. And on the face of it, yeah, Ireland does. The overhead that Ed Walsh put up this morning is factually completely correct. Ireland and Estonia are the only two countries on this planet that uses the single transferable vote electoral system for electing their lower house, their main parliament. There are other places that use SDV for other kinds of elections. And what you have there is the most up-to-date figures there are. This is the current situation for, I think it's about 87 democracies, so the vast bulk of the world's democracies. And no massive surprise there. I'll just draw your attention to the red boxes. The red boxes on the left, starting with block, is just summarising what the state of play is in what are known as non-proportional electoral systems. And the red boxes on the other side, finishing with list, is showing the state of play with the proportional electoral systems. I'll try and explain the difference between the two as I go through this. And as you can see, the list electoral system is the most popular electoral system in terms of the number of countries that uses it, which is what Ed Walsh said this morning. If you look at the world's populations, then SMP, which is the British first-past-the-post electoral system, is the most popular electoral system by number of voters, and that's largely because India uses it. So they're the two big systems, and single transferable vote is barely featuring on that slide. So the argument is Ireland has a unique electoral system. It would seem to be a very safe argument to be making. But actually, if we're going to really understand the features of the Irish electoral system that supposedly make it this unique electoral system, we need to understand how it compares with other electoral systems. And the way to do it, this is an attempt to summarise what can be done in a more scientific way if I was in the right kind of forum, but I don't want to drive you nuts here. That there are two main dimensions of variation when we look at electoral systems. The most well-known one is how proportional they are, which is what's going on across the top of the screen. You have the single-member plurality, the British system, which is one of the least proportional systems in the world. And on the far right, the various list systems, which are the most proportional systems. And that's the average way to look at it. And the single transferable vote is sort of somewhere in the proportional camp. It's where we'd expect it to be. But the feature that really is at the heart of the debate in Ireland is the other dimension of variation of electoral systems, which is what's going on the vertical, over how open or closed they are. What that's trying to get at is how much choice does the voter have when they go into the polling booth. So an example of a closed electoral system would be something like South Africa, where if you were a supporter of the ANC party, you would go into the polling station and you were given a ballot paper which had a picture of all the party leaders, and you tick the box next to Nelson Mandela's name or whoever the leader of the ANC is today. And by that act, you're giving a vote for the party. The party itself is determining who wins the seats based on how many votes it gets. So it's a very closed system. The voter doesn't have an awful lot of say over the fate of individual candidates. An open electoral system, well, we all know Ireland is an open electoral system, where Noel Dempsey is running around the constituency chasing votes from all parties, including his own, to try and make sure that he wins that seat or holds that seat. So his electoral fate is determined by how many votes he as an individual gets. And what that is trying to do is to show all the main electoral systems that feature in all the debates. And what I'm trying to show with this is the yellow circle, the dotted red line yellow circle is the thing to really focus on. Because in that yellow circle, you have the German mixed member system, and you also have a number of the list systems. And what I'm trying to get at there is that list systems is quite a rich feast of different electoral systems that fall under the family name list electoral system. I mentioned the case of South Africa a few minutes ago, with a closed electoral system. The other extreme is Switzerland. Switzerland uses a list electoral system. But when you go into the polling station, and this is actually answering one of John's questions, when you go into the polling station in Switzerland as a Swiss voter, you can vote for any number of candidates from any number of the parties that you want to. So if you want to, if there are, 20 seats to be filled in that constituency, you as a Swiss voter has a right to vote for 20 different candidates from 20 different parties. Does that sound familiar? It's our system. It's just called the list system. Luxembourgers have exactly the same system. In Denmark and Finland, you vote for individual candidates. And indeed, right across the mainland of continental Europe, the picture that we saw earlier on that Ed Walsh put up, to varying degrees there are list systems that allow voters to express a preference vote for individual candidates. Belgium, Netherlands have recently increased the value of that particular vote, for example. Scandinavian countries also. So as we go down that purple arrow, list systems start to become, as we get down to Switzerland and Luxembourg, very much like the Irish single transferable vote electoral system. And what I'm trying to say by saying that is that The myth about the uniqueness of the Irish electoral system is missing that very important point, which is that, yes, it's a unique system by virtue of the fact that it's hardly used except outside of Malta and Ireland. But the features that it has, the features that relate to how politicians operate, chasing personal votes, are shared by other electoral systems. And in that sense, it's a myth to call it unique. So then I move on to my second myth. The second myth is that electoral reform works, because that's the essence of the argument of those who are saying that we need to have electoral reform in Ireland. It works. We all know of examples, I'm sure, where there has been electoral reform. It's clearly something that people think is in the air. In New Zealand, they changed their electoral system famously to the German system in the early 1990s. Italy keeps changing its electoral system. Canada has had all sorts of debates about its electoral system. We all know in Britain, the mother of parliaments could be about to have a reform of its electoral system. It seems electoral reform is the happening thing. And indeed, if we look at the evidence, it does look quite impressive. On the basis of the evidence, there would be good reason to argue that electoral reform works, because here we have a large number of countries. This is the population of countries in the last 20 years that have reformed, have changed their electoral system to a brand new electoral system. 56 countries. That's pretty impressive. That would be good grounds for arguing that, why don't we do it as well? If they're doing it, it clearly works. And indeed, it's interesting to see, I'll highlight it for your attention there, that half of the cases there, a good half of the cases have adopted the mixed member system, a German-type system, the system that has featured so prominently in a lot of the articles in newspapers here about whether Ireland should adopt the German system. It does seem to be the system much in favour, much in vogue. So all the evidence would seem to support the case that electoral reform works. Well, does it? Let me just pick out one or two things to try and give the counter argument. The first thing I'd draw your attention to is while there have been many cases of countries that have adopted mixed-membered systems, there have equally been a large number of cases that have since dropped it. Italy dropped it, Russia dropped it, Ukraine dropped it, and as you can see in the overhead, there's a lot of other countries that dropped that electoral system. So clearly, there were certain things about how the mixed-member system works that didn't quite work to plan in at least a number of those cases. A second thing I just want you to focus on is when we talk about mixed-member systems, the sharp-eyed among you who can see this slide will have noticed there's two different categories there, one called MMM and one called MMP. Well, MMP is the German system. It's called mixed-member proportional. It's a proportional electoral system. MMM is its evil twin. It is not a proportional system. It is a system that can produce incredible distortions in election results because it's two separate parallel elections, the British-type election and the European list-type election. And a large party can pick up huge amounts of seats and have very distorted election results. So it's most certainly not a system we want. So if we're being honest about it, if it is the German system we're looking for, we'll have a look at the countries that have adopted it. New Zealand, I mentioned earlier on, that's fine. But actually, in the next year, the New Zealand voters are about to have another referendum on their electoral system. So they may be about to abandon that system. And then we've got Albania, Lesotho, Bolivia, Venezuela. Forgive me, but I'm not exactly looking at cases of democracies around the world that we would necessarily, in all cases, want to emulate. Now, let me sort of round off this bit by really making the point that you need to make about that slide is the 56 cases. How many of you spotted the established democracies among those 56 cases? Let me help you. Just take a second or two just to see the boxes empty. And then you suddenly realize what we're left with. 3 countries, Italy, New Zealand, and Japan. They are the only 3 countries in the last 20 years that have had a fundamental electoral reform of their electoral system. And indeed, of one of them, Italy, as I said, has gone back to the system it abandoned in 1991. So there are reasons why it did it, I know, but nevertheless, it went back to roughly where it started. New Zealand, as I said earlier on, is considering the possibility of changing its electoral system again. So actually, the one that seems to have bedded down is Japan. And as all the literature shows, of those 3 cases of reform, all of which happened in the early 1990s, Japan is seen as the least successful in terms of sorting out the problems that caused the electoral reform in the first place. So we're not really left with a great record of success there. And I think it gives good grounds for arguing that the case for electoral reform doesn't particularly well stack up here. If other countries haven't really gone down this road, do we really think it's going to work in Ireland? The third myth, which is the heart of the argument, is a new electoral system would change Irish politics. That's the essence of the case that's been made by Noel Dempsey and Gareth Fitzgerald and many, many others. And this is at the heart of the debate about the failings of this electoral system, that the single transferable vote causes an excessive focus on the constituency by our politicians, to the detriment of their work in the Parliament and other activities that we really would prefer them to be involved with, like running the system properly. But the fact of the matter is that really this is an emphasis that's particular, even peculiar to Ireland, not to the single transferable vote electoral system. I'll say that again. It's a peculiar matter to Ireland, not to the single transferable vote electoral system. Here's just one tiny piece of evidence that is explaining why I'm saying that. The Joint Committee of the Constitution carried out a survey of Dáil deputies earlier this year, a proper representative sample of Dáil deputies. And at precisely the same time, a PhD student in Malta used the same survey instrument to carry out a representative survey of Maltese MPs. So the same survey was being carried out at the same time, both of them carried out using the same questionnaire. And as you can see, Irish politicians, 53% of Dáil deputies, 53% of their time is devoted to constituency work. That's the biggest emphasis of their time on the constituency. Not a very surprising statistic. What is more revealing is when you look at the Maltese MPs, that it's much more evenly spread, the kind of activities that they engage in. And indeed, I could add to that a fair amount of survey work that's been done over the years of legislators in Australia that uses the single transferable vote for electing its senators and electing many of the parliamentarians in each of the Australian states. The same kind of findings as you get in Malta, namely that constituency service is a far smaller feature of the daily life of a politician in Australia. So it doesn't sort of suggest that the single transferable vote is really at the heart of the matter here, that if you change the single transferable vote, you're necessarily going to change things. So let me just engage with that for a minute or two. Do we really think that a shift to a new electoral system would change things? Do we really think, as I said earlier on, that on a Monday morning, having had the electoral reform, that the average Dáil deputy is going to wake up and think that he or she has to operate in a different way? I would hazard the argument, naive political theorist though I might be, that is not correct. I would hazard the argument that is not so. And let me toy with this for a bit. What are the options? Effectively, there are two main options, and these are the ones that are raised. If we were going to change the single transferable vote system, option one would be to go for the list system. That's the one that Ed Walsh referred to at the end of his talk earlier today. Okay, so if we decide we're going to go for the list system, what do we do? Do we go for the open list system? Do we go for the systems that they use in, the systems that they use, for example, in, I think which example I'd use, in Finland, which, as I showed in an earlier figure, puts the list system very close to where the single transferable vote system is. In other words, if you decided that it's going to be an open list system, you're changing nothing. You're going to have exactly the same system, effectively, with exactly the same constituency interests being promoted, the needs to chase the votes of the electorate that we currently get in Ireland. So what's the alternative? Well, let's go for a closed list system. If the evils of the open list system are the same as the evils of single transferable vote, let's go for something like South Africa's closed list system, the far left of that figure. Then we have a different problem. And this is an attempt to summarise what could be shown again with proper figures. And that is, if you think about it, what is the reference group that an average politician is thinking about? Currently, the reference group that the average politician is thinking about here is the electorate. So hence the need to fix the drains, fix the social welfare payments and chase the hearses of the average voter in the constituency to make damn sure that they maximise their votes, because if they don't do it, the other guy's going to do it and they'll get maximising votes. So if we go to the South African extreme of a closed list system, we'll remove that need to be chasing the votes of the electorate. However, as this slide is trying to demonstrate for you, what you then do is you replace the need to keep the electorate sweet with the need to keep the selectorate sweet, namely the individuals within the parties who determine the electoral fate of the individual politicians by determining how far up the ranking they're going to be and whether they're going to win the seat or not. So that if you want to maximise your chances of being elected in a closed list system, you have to make damn sure you're chasing the hearses, writing the letters, fixing the constituency interests of the people who are going to be determining where you're ranked So you're just replacing one reference group with another reference group. You're not fixing the fundamental problem that underlies it all. So LIST doesn't seem to offer any real hopeful opportunities. So we might go for the mixed member system. Mixed member system because it is, after all, the best of both worlds. You're getting your individual politicians in constituencies like you have in Britain, and then you're getting these wonderfully talented individuals who are going to be put up top of the list of ministerial calibre, who are all going to make our lives much, much better because they're going to work so much better in the Parliament. The best of both worlds. We get our constituency service and we get our brilliant politicians. The problem with that is that the evidence doesn't stack up. There's enough research now being done on mixed member systems in actuality, where they've carried out survey work of both voters and politicians, that are demonstrating the point, which is that what you're getting are serious contamination effects of one part of the electoral system affecting the behaviour of another part of the electoral system. I'll give you the obvious example here, where you'll have the list MPs conscious of the fact that their fate is determined by how well they do in terms of pleasing the party at large, so they get ranked up the party list, high up the party list, thinking life would be so much more secure if they served constituencies, because then they would be masters of their own fate, mistresses of their own fate. So what you then get are list MPs competing with and certainly copying and following the same kind of constituency practices of their constituency counterparts. So you actually get constituency service being done by list MPs. That's what we're finding, contamination of one over the other. So you're not necessarily going to fix it by going to that electoral system. So where are we left? I've outlined the three myths. We're left with a situation where it can be argued that Ireland's electoral system is really not all that unique. We're left with a situation where the international record of electoral reform to date is not all that impressive. And we're left with the fact that single transferable vote is really not the reason why we have the politicians we have and why we have politicians doing the things they do. All of those I've tried to demonstrate are at base myths. So what do we do? And this is where I get to my final remarks, which is, if we're going to come up with a solution, what is the solution? Well, I think the argument is, and this again is something that political science has been trying to argue for a while. Earlier on, people were talking about how esteemed economists were being ignored for so many years. Well, unfortunately, we little political scientists have also been ignored. Because for year on year, Michael Gallagher, Lee Comito, Michael Marsh, Peter Mayer, myself, I can count on the endless numbers of individuals have been saying the same thing, and we're just being dismissed. So, well, dismiss me if you want to again here today, but let me tell you what is the essence of the argument. And it's this, that too much of the focus is on the demand side, on the supply side. Too much of the focus is on the supply side. It's too much of the focus is on what the TDs do, what service they supply. What we need is to focus on the demand side, what we as citizens are asking of our politicians. If we fix the demand side, we'll fix the problem. So rather than thinking about changing the electoral system, which is changing the supply, we need to change those features of our institutions that are forcing or causing us to chase the politicians to help sort out problems. And there are two very simple things that we could be looking at. First, we could look at the public service citizen interface. I've been fortunate in life never to have been unemployed, but having just come back to Ireland and having had to have my number plate changed on my car and having had to get an Irish driver's license, two relatively mundane little things, the amount of effort that I had to go through, the amount of time that was wasted dealing with what is fundamentally an extremely simple task. I didn't go to my TD, but I came quite close at one point. And that is the essence of that first problem, which is the public sector, public service citizen interface does not work adequately in this country. So as rational citizens, no wonder we're trying to go around an apparatus that is broken and going directly to the people who we think can sort the problem out. And that is compounded by the second problem. The second problem is the weakness of our local government. We have one of those bizarre ironies right now that we are at one and the same time the most decentralized political system in the world in terms of the constituency orientation and localism of our national politicians, while at the same time the most centralized political system in the world by virtue of the fact that our local government is virtually not there. It's under-resourced and has few, if any, significant powers. So it's the combination of a weak interface between the public sector and the citizens and a weak local government that causes the demand problems on our politicians. And if we're going to focus on solutions, they're the areas we should focus on. Thank you.